Hey, this is Jon Reed. I've got a usual suspect, Brian Sommer. What's going on?
I don't know what I'm suspected of doing, but I'm probably going to have to cop a plea on it no matter what.
So let's set the stage here. You and I are back in Atlanta. We are fresh off, some Tex-Mex, but we're not going to talk about that. That was last night. Today, we had a full first day of the Sage Analyst event. And that's leading up to their Sage Future User Conference in San Francisco, end of April. And so I think they really wanted to talk with analysts and kind of really just test out a lot of the stuff they want to share with customers and get a sense of where we stand on that. Super interesting day, back-to-back sessions now. I got a bunch of one-on-ones tomorrow, so some of that I haven't gotten yet. But we had some good casual conversations last night as well. So we got a fair amount that we want to share, but we should also point out that we don't want to steal Sage's thunder from their show. So a lot of the specifics that we usually give you, like usually you'll rattle off a bunch of company data, they were going to go light on that. What we are going to give you is some of the debates that we had and some of the issues that got raised, because I think some really potent topics came up that anyone who cares about things like cloud software, the future of AI, the future of, small, medium businesses, those are all potent themes, right?
Oh, yeah. This is a company that Sage has had a lot of solutions in a few market spaces, the very smallest companies, all the way up to a number of like mid-market, and some larger enterprises have been users. But it kind of depends on the product line, the vertical, and so forth. But a lot of the focus today was really around Intact more than anything else. Intact seems to be spawning off all kinds of solid vertical extensions for them and help them in their growth around the planet. Intact has become clearly, I'd say, the star of their application software suite. And that's not to take anything away from some of the other products. It's just that that Intact has just very, very rich functionality and capability, and it has almost since the get-go.
Yeah, and also just a quick note on that too, that Intact is not the, just the North American-centric company that we once knew. Like, what is 100 plus geographies now, something like that.
They mentioned it's running in something like 100 and...
Brian's going through his notes while we check. Yeah, that's great for the listeners, Brian. But anyhow, yeah. So
Intact, here it is, 120 plus countries, 160 currencies supported.
Right.
So it's grown up.
Right, exactly. And so in the context of this, obviously big debates, right? Because Sage is in a position like a lot of big software vendors where they haven't had the most awesome year on the stock market. And yet a lot of folks that are invested in this industry, like myself, see a lot of strong fundamentals especially with Intact, but with modern cloud software, which I think is a very strong baseline on which to build next generation AI services. But anyhow, it provokes some really fascinating debates. I'll just throw some out to you. Shrinking margins, the future of ERP, pricing, all that stuff came up today. Anything you want to riff on there?
Well, let's start with the kind of the future, if you will. You and I have written and talked about, is there going to be a SaaSpocalypse and all that kind of stuff? And the answer is no. And one of the big reasons, and I just came out of a conversation with one of the Sage execs on this matter, is there's so much logic and power in a number of pieces of the ERP suite that we know that smart vendors are going to, if you will, decompose the initial suite and make some of these callable routines through agents. And a good example in General Ledger is it is a bruiser to try and generate a multi-column or multi-time period summary and detail aligned financial statement like a balance sheet or what have you. You're not going to, you'll be working till the cows come home trying to build something like that using AI, and it's still not going to work right. So why not just salvage and repurpose that functionality in your core ERP suite and make that callable by an agentic tool. The other thing on this, the future, is the has to do with how people are going to buy and what they're going to use and so forth. And we had some customers come through today to talk to us, and it was clear none of them have any intention of kicking Intact to the curb. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, of course, they handpicked the customers, Brian. They wouldn't pick customers who were getting ready to leave them. But no, they all had their reasons, and they were quite articulate in talking about how they get huge value out of things, and they absolutely needed certainty. In fact, one of the customers said that their prereqs is that any software they put in had to have a great cost benefit. It must permit the firm to continue to grow without growing headcount, and they wanted to make sure that the tools were, like, let's say, supporting all the other AI capabilities that are coming around, but not replace them. So the whole SaaS apocalypse kind of angle is just dead in the water right now. And I think the customers out there in the world, they've figured that out. They know that.
So here's some things that I can share about that I think are really worth noting. I just wrote a big piece on what is working and not working on agentic AI projects on Diginomica. But one of the fascinating things about Sage under the leadership of Aaron Harris, CTO, who I think is one of the most interesting CTOs to talk with, is just how much they've really invested in one of the things I noted, which is domain-specific models and also smaller models, which a lot of vendors are getting into. And a big part of that relates to the margin compression topic that you want to talk about a bit, which is, Sage understands they have to keep costs under control. That's one of the issues. And so they're being very, very specific about when they use these frontier or reasoning capabilities that are the more expensive end of the spectrum versus their own models, which can be literally fractions or just a few percentage points of the cost of these larger models. And it's really important when you're talking about profitability and margins that you keep some of those AI costs under somewhat of a control. But the other really interesting aspect is Sage has taken it pretty far with a lot of domain-specific models and a lot of stuff around finance. And we've talked with Aaron about this on podcasts before, and we've written about some of this. But in terms of their proprietary AI model, things like understanding how general ledgers are coded, knowing how to match purchase orders, vendor matching, outlier detection stuff, some of that the large language models really aren't very good at. Aaron had a really funny one too, because he talked about how some of the off-the-shelf stuff, they weren't recognizing some of the key capabilities. They were getting confused. So they put in like a way of filtering some of the problems that they were running into. So I was just looking for the slide here. Things like, how can you help me with my Sage account and take me to my balance sheet? We're getting flagged by content moderation, right? And so it's just an example of how a lot of these out-of-the-box models and big AI companies aren't really catering to the needs of finance users. But then on the flip side with Sage, some of the capabilities where they're literally training on accounts payable automation, millions and millions of invoices, multiple languages, off-the-shelf models are nearly twice as likely to make mistakes. For fields like due date, 3 times more likely to make a mistake. We talked about how they struggle reading PDFs. Anyway, I'll stop my monologue about this, but I think it's kind of important as far as this is one of the reasons why Sage is pushing back on this AI can destroy SaaS narrative, is they're saying, not only do we have all the regulatory and compliance stuff built in, we got a lot of specifics that our finance teams need. So
Yeah, I thought Aaron could have probably gone harder and longer even on some of those examples that he was using. And they really go to the point. And I'm sure if they share that in a couple of weeks down in San Francisco with all their customers, that's going to really resonate with a number of them who already have questions about the reliability of AI results. And it's interesting when you hear the customers here talking, to the one, they'll all tell you that they see some value in AI, that's for sure, but they also know the stuff doesn't deliver 100% accurate kind of information. And the examples that Aaron was giving were, I think, they just reinforced it from a little bit different angle by talking about what they've found in experimenting with these different general purpose LLMs, among other things. And even when they've built their own LLMs, they've had to put some interesting twists and changes in there. There was an example somebody gave about objectionable content, which I'll not repeat on here, but it was interesting that they had Sage has a customer that makes, let's say, some grown-up products.
Right.
And yet,
again, it was getting flagged by guardrails, which they had to customize. Yeah.
Right.
And we're able to customize, which is the key. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, we're not through with finding surprising kinds of things along the way in the journey to an AI future.
So why do you think this shrinking margins conversation is important?
Well, because everyone knows that AI can be used to generate code. That's the first thing. So that goes straight to let's call it cost of goods sold for a software company. You can work that cost down and down and down. You can also see continuing price pressure to reduce the cost of hardware. The power of the hardware goes up and the cost of it keeps going down. So now I personally believe we're going to see compression on most cost categories until you get to the actual use of LLMs and the like. And that's because I don't think the pricing in that space is anywhere near correct right now, given the amount of capital going into developing data centers and training AI models. I don't know that you could count on those prices not to go actually the other direction, go way up in time, unless the capital markets are willing to just throw even more money at that space with no hope of getting a return on it. And that's just not rational. So at some point, that end of the cost structure will rationalize. Others will continue to keep facing deflationary pressure on there, and that's going to
I happen to think that the costs of like frontier models with heavy inference and quote unquote reasoning are going to keep going up. But I do think that Sage has some protection against that by their diminished usage of and dependence on those models for a lot of the things they're doing. But it is really interesting because I do think that the software industry as a whole has had a lot of years where they weren't under a lot of margin pressure, let's just say. And you can
fat, dumb, and happy.
You can get comfortable with that. And I think to some extent, I view it as healthy, like that every vendor in this industry now has to look at what value they're truly delivering and how much they can charge for it and how much more it's going to cost to deliver AI with it. I think that's really healthy. What I don't think is healthy is the irrational markets and all the ups and downs and all of that. I don't think that's healthy. And also I think a lot of the misconceptions, I think like while you can build software quickly with AI, you can't build intact quickly from scratch with AI. I'm sorry. And beyond that, you can't duplicate the so-called ecosystem of relationships and the trust built up with finance leaders and accountants and all of that. You can't just magically create that in your bedroom with Claude code.
Not magically, but auto-magically,
right.
But you said the T word, trust, and I think we should touch on that. We heard that word, 28,047 times here today. And, I just want to acknowledge for the Intact folks listening on this, the Sage folks, that, we heard you. And we know that more than anything else, that differentiates a solid, compliant, regulatory mandated kind of solution. It separates them from I built something over the weekend using Chat GPT, and I think it can replace our entire payroll system. you know, not if you want to trust the outputs coming out of it. They're correct in pointing out how important trust is. And I think it will be a critical buyer value if it isn't already. I don't know too many accountants who don't just cringe when they hear the words creative and accounting in the same sentence because they know a jail term's coming right behind that. And, so trust absolutely has to be there.
And we saw that in the customer panel too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the 3 customers there very much wanting to consume AI functionality within their Sage investments. I thought the customer panel was interesting from a number of angles, and we can't talk too specific about the customers because we haven't really gone over how much of that is going to get shared publicly yet. But here's a few interesting things I took from the customer panel. One is that none of the customers are interested in using AI to rebuild any Sage components from scratch or anything like that. But
that's correct. None of them had the appetite for that at all. And I don't think they even have the bandwidth to do it is the most important thing. They've got a schedule that's unrelenting of closes and
but there is a lot of interest in AI amongst those customers and a fair amount of usage. And while no headcount reduction talk from those customers, in fact, one of them said they would be doing some hiring. Another one was, I think 2 of them were talking about having to do less hiring because, essentially not headcount reductions, but we don't need to hire as many people. I think what's interesting and what I'm finding is, and we saw this on the panel, is customers aren't on the same page with each other in terms of exactly how they want to approach this.
Correct.
But what I look for personally is that the customer has a clear understanding of how they want to approach it, and that's how they're communicating it internally. But it's interesting because there's no consensus around those things. Customers are approaching that differently.
So I don't mean this in any whatever self-promoting way, but I asked a question of those customers that really I thought hung them up, and that was on they're saying that they want their people to get trained up and be knowledgeable in using AI, and because they think it's going to be good for these people's careers longer term. That's fine. So I asked the question, so what are you doing as their boss to free up time from them to get rid of some of the fire drills that they go through all the time so that these people can actually take some training and become very AI literate and capable? And then the second part of that is, and what are you doing as their boss to free up time for yourself so you can spend time mentoring and growing these people to become these super skilled accountants that you say you're going to need in this AI age? And they never not one of them addressed what they're doing themselves personally to free up time. In fact, one of them basically described, I call it the nightmare scenario, where every day, her boss is calling with, we're going to do a potential acquisition. Or, it's always one fire drill after another trying to, get stuff done. So that goes I'm going to file that under the category of the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that particular finance person's experience. And for the other is the fact that there weren't clear training plans and programs other than, well, we just like to send the people that seem to be more interested, we'll find some training for them. It didn't leave me with a conscientious plan was actually underway.
Not necessarily. I thought one of the customers in particular talked pretty enthusiastically about their proactive culture in terms of seeking out training and learning. I think some of that's really going to vary by customer again, which is what's interesting, because another customer was pretty open that basically not all of their current people are going to make it.
Right.
And so I really do think that type of stuff is where I see a lot of variation. And, I think that comes down to the fact that even though they might all be deriving value from Sage software, they all have a different approach internally to how they want to run their company, and the AI philosophy is going to vary too. So
Yeah, I'm not being critical of those folks. I'm pointing out they didn't answer my question,
Well, you asked
but
a
more
hard
importantly,
question, Brian.
well, that's I guess that's what I do. But anyway, um,
Was there anything else that really jumped out at you in terms of hot topics today?
the fact that everyone has to change their ERP just makes the change table stakes to remain competitive. But I wasn't bowled over with some whoa, look at that, kind of moment. But some of that has to do with the fact that we're dealing with a very staid, conservative kind of company that never tips its hand, even a second earlier than it absolutely needs to. It's not about flash, and sex appeal. It's really about substance. And that kind of goes not only to their culture, but it goes to the kind of way they like to be perceived in the market.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I got the perception that they're going to want to go bolder in terms of what their differentiation is. To be fair, I don't think they got into all of their views on the future of ERP. They were very upfront with us that they wanted to emphasize a more practical agenda for the next number of months. So we don't totally know what their future
No, and
vision is.
they're keeping their cards very close to the vest.
Um,
So yeah,
but I will say just and I don't know how much of that they wanted us to get into on this podcast, but what I will say is that I would like to see them be bolder in how they're different. And I know that's not easy for a publicly traded company with a lot of history to do, but I'd like to see them be aggressive, for example, on how much better their results are than you can do as a finance leader at home with makeshift feeding data into your AI assistant of choice. I'd like them to be much more aggressive about why what they're doing is different. And then, I think there's a whole lot of education that goes into that from a customer standpoint and a lot of transparency around things like pricing and the fact that no one's figured out all of the pricing yet. And so I don't think that vendors should be so aggressively rigid about, oh, this is what we charge for AI because in 6 months you're going to have to change it. So why not involve your customers more in that process? And I would say that to almost any vendor. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they finally come down on all of their pricing stuff. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I get a little worried about the future of ERP conversations because I feel like sometimes right now it's just dominated by, oh, it's just going to be an agentic prompt in the future and you're never going to need to see a screen again and all that. And I think that's bullshit. What I'm a lot more interested in is I don't think ERP is going to survive as a product category. And I think in the long run, when you look ahead years and years and years, and I think we're going to judge our software by how much it allows us to keep pace in a real-time world with all the information we need, and to process things quickly and on the fly. And I think that's going to be how we judge stuff, and also how we, how proactive the system is, how much we can learn from it when we want to ask it stuff. I think those are the things we're going to judge software by, not this is ERP or this is AI or whatever. I think it'd be super interesting to have had a longer conversation about that today, but, that wasn't the focus.
So I don't know if I will have retired before this happens, but someday I'd like to see the funeral service for ERP.
Right.
And I agree with you that what we know today is rapidly, I think, starting to come apart, and that era is starting to go away. What we're going to see instead is, instead of a closed-in system that's focused on internal transactions, most notably accounting-based transactions, that was an artifact of a time when everything was super expensive and constrained. Memory, throughput, computers, access, computer speeds, everything you can imagine was highly constrained. So software developers picked the most important parts to automate, and that's where they spent their money, and that's it. We don't have those constraints anymore. We now have effectively an IT environment of zero constraints almost. Now, with that, we need to quit thinking only about transactions that eventually end up in a general ledger. This is a time for like Intact to think broader. Like, why don't we focus on, let's call them events or business events, and they could be all kinds of things. It's inflation figures. It's Fed funds interest rate increases or decreases. It's potential disruptions in supply chain because of whatever wars or weather effects or what have you. All of those things should trigger cascades of thinking. And it happens actually in companies today, except it usually happens because of a barrage of somebody sends an email and they copy 50 people on it. It's like, oh, interest rates went up a full percentage point. What are we going to do? And procurement's scaling back purchases, treasury's reforecasting the cash, plan. Now you're going to have agents to do all that orchestration, and it just happens. Okay. So that's why I agree with you. We're not going to have an ERP. We're going to have something that's triggered by events more than anything else and delivers super fast, instantaneous kinds of reactions to it. We're going to go to like from accounting to almost like a business war games kind of world where there's all these async and synchronous processes going.
But it's going to take a little longer than people think because vendors aren't ready for a category-free world, and to an extent, a lot of customers aren't either. But that is, I think, where we're ultimately headed. But we didn't talk about that a whole lot today, so that's just you and me riffing. So let's wrap it up with a couple of rapid-fire things. I think they've got a very, very solid AI strategy for some of the reasons I articulated. I did a podcast with Aaron Harris not too long ago on that. You can check out on Diginomica. So I won't go into that further. But having said that, I like a lot of what they're doing. Let's raise an open question that we'd like to learn more about or see more on with them. My open question for them would be, I really like how they're executing with Intact and also a lot of the vertical strategy and the vertical apps and the platform for partners and all of that. And how AI strategy fits into all of that. That all works for me. And I think they have a strong modernization path for X3 as well. I'll be really interested to see how some of the other quote unquote older Sage products fare in this transition. One of the things Aaron Harris has been very careful about has been to make sure that AI services are available to all of the software within this quote unquote Sage family. But I do think when you find yourself on older software releases, in my opinion, it's harder to absorb quote unquote cutting edge AI in those contexts, especially if you've over customized those products or you're sitting on what you might call older processes. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they cope with that. And we didn't get fully into that conversation today, so I'll be interested in that one. What about you?
I'd like to find the door that behind it is the whole R&D lab, and I'd like to be able to get access in there and just walk around for like half a day and not only pick the brains of the people that are in there, but just see what it is that they're like experimenting with and so forth. I got to believe, I've known Aaron for a long, long time. The guy's really sharp and knows his stuff, no question about it. And I know he's always a few years ahead of the market, and whatever he's telling his lieutenants as to where they ought to be focusing their energies, that's what I'd like to get a look into. I'm not trying to learn trade secrets, but I know that customers they don't buy the software that's available today. They're buying the hope and expectation that they're hooking up with a vendor that's got a long life in front of it. They want that. They want to know with some measure of certainty, as tough as that is to figure out, that this is a company that they can sleep comfortably at night knowing that they're working on the most important things that the customer hasn't even anticipated yet. Okay. That's why I want to look in that R&D shop.
All right, final quick question. What's the most important thing that you think they should do at Sage Future? And I'll let you think about it while I give you mine. What I think they need to do is, I know they're going to be thinking about, we got to present our agentic AI vision of the future and all of that. The two things I'll be looking for, because a lot of vendors have not done a good job of this, I want to see them come onto stage and start by acknowledging what their customers are dealing with right now in the macro environment, the challenges they're facing, maybe some of the opportunities that exist in those conditions, I want to hear things like inflation, tariffs, supply chain volatility as part of how they frame everything they're trying to do to help customers. I want to hear some of that. And I also want to hear customers who are kicking ass right now with whatever stage of the evolution they're in, because a lot of vendors are really overlooking the power of showing how much success certain customers are having now, because they're not necessarily using a lot of the agentic stuff heavy duty yet. And they're overlooking the fact that if you're contending really well in this market right now, that's a story worth telling. And I want to hear some of those stories too.
It's always interesting. When somebody throws a question at you and I, we both look at it from completely different kind of perspectives.
Yeah, we do.
So, what do I want to see them do? To me, I think human beings are very tactile. They want to see it, touch it, feel it, experience it.
Yeah.
And I want to see them make a Sage experience that's just going to resonate through to the core, the heart and soul of the audience that's out there. And maybe what they need to do is bring an entire process out. I don't care if it's digitally or it's in person, put it on the stage and walk the audience through how things are going to be so radically different. Bring that to life and make me sit up in my chair, in my uncomfortable conference stadium chair, whatever they've got over there.
Yeah.
And go, oh man, I got to get me some of that. I live for the experience.
Show, don't tell.
That's right.
Right.
Oh, and no marching bands.
No marching bands.
That's cheating.
And Brian, when the vacuum cleaner goes on, the podcast goes off. You and I have overstayed our welcome. I think we've actually stayed beyond the office policy hours. Thanks, Sage, for letting us do that. Hopefully we don't get arrested as we go downstairs. Catch you soon, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.